Welcome to The Unspoken Truth. I'm your host, Rob Russ.
And live from Minnesota, Edward R. Anderson.
G'day, Ed. How you doing today, mate? Happy Friday.
Living the dream, Robbie. Thanks for asking. How are you doing? Happy Friday. Happy Saturday.
Yeah. Happy Saturday for me. Really good. Looking forward to a couple of days off. It's been a very busy week in the news. I'm excited to be doing this show here with you today to round out the week with some hypocrisy from the government. The government is going to do some things that are way outside of the Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, in the United States, there's been a whole bunch of senators that have completely snubbed the Constitution. And the Constitution is the document that kind of is the rule book about how society is governed. We have that here in Australia with a voice to Parliament, which has been a very divisive topic that people are discussing all the time. They want to put constitutional amendments to the rule book of how things operate, which then opens the door to legal action. So if somebody is in the Constitution, they're part of the voice to Parliament, and they dispute what actually legislation or what a senator says or what they want to do, or the recommendation that they make doesn't go forward, then they can go to the High Court, and the High Court can then actually make a decision about that. And that has been said by the yes side of the vote as misinformation and malinformation. That's not technically correct. That's how you're going to do it. And then when everybody on the no side of the campaign says, well, how are we going to do it? Everyone goes, well, not really sure. We don't really know. What's the rule book that governs the way a country works? And it's no different in the United States. It's a slightly different system that you have, but it's still the rule book, and it sets out the precedent of how it should work. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, here at The Unspoken Truth, we'll give you the inside gouge. We'll take you behind the story. We'll take you behind the mainstream media, and we'll show you a story like today where NATO will overrule and ultimately veto the US Congress. So it's NATO and the EU and those people in their stuffy suits in those places in Brussels that are actually going to decide if Americans go to war or not. And by association, Australians as well. So why do they want this so badly? Are there globalists that are embedded in Australian society? I think so. And American society? Absolutely. I'll show you how there are some globalists in Australian society in a sec with some really damning revelations that have come out in the last couple of weeks. All right, let's get into today's show. Well, Ed, there's a lot to cover there in that introduction. Let me just start off by showing you how deep state has infiltrated into Australian society. And let's begin that discussion about what you've got there. So in the last couple of days, there's been a revelation that the boss of ASIC has interfered with the parliamentary process. So ASIC is the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, and this person, those people they're like the financial police, right? So if you have a company, you're governed by ASIC. The company constitution that you have is the rules for your company, and they're making sure that you're doing all the right rules. If you're a public company, there's rules around that, and ASIC are the enforcing body. It's not the police, it's not the federal police, it's ASIC that govern civil matters like that. And we've seen in the last couple of months a radical shift with ASIC's rhetoric towards ESG type scenarios. And the boss of ASIC is paid like $800,000 a year. He's like a public servant, right? Nearly $1 million a year gets paid by the Australian government. But for some reason, they're talking about ESG. Like, what has ESG got to do with your remit of keeping companies in line? It doesn't make any sense. And then there was a Senate inquiry here in Australia that was set up to actually investigate ASIC to go, hey, what are you doing talking about ESG? Shouldn't you be talking about this? And there's a whole remit of things that they were going to investigate. So I might have this incorrect, so I'm happy to stand corrected on some of these points. But my understanding of it is this. On the day of the inquiry, when they were going to set that up in the Senate, people from ASIC had called some of the senators to try and change the way that this inquiry was going to work. So it was set up by one side of politics, and ASIC said, can you get it set up and used by the other side of politics? So what they were trying to do was to interfere with the process where the senators were going to ask ASIC questions on the public record. And they're going to ask questions like, why are you focusing on ESG? What has that got to do with financial services and laws to do with finance here in Australia? So here we have the governing body of companies in Australia talking about ESG, which is nothing to do at all with anything that is inside of their remit. It's not in any of their constitution. And then they're trying to interfere with a parliamentary process when somebody says, I think we should set up a committee and investigate these people. Deep state is embedded in all societies. And deep state doesn't come in the form of a politician, a senator, or a congressperson, or a member of House of Representatives. Deep state is the bureaucrats that are there. I believe the politicians, it's tricky for the politicians to be corrupted because they're public figures, but those bureaucrats are not public figures. The boss of ASIC is not a public figure. And I'm not saying that that individual themselves interfered with the process, but people within that organization interfered with the process. And it's on public record through freedom of information. So now as we go forward into your report here today, Ed, you were talking that US senators snub the Constitution of the United States because they looked at what was actually happening. So why don't you set us up here and we'll have a look at your report so I don't stomp on the points in your report.
Okay, so this report is further evidence that our society is moving more and more away from our founding principles, and that is led by the people in power. Our politicians who swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States when they take office. As soon as they take their hand off the Bible, they forget what the Constitution even is.
Forgot what they were upholding.
That's right. It's okay. What do I have to say to get into office? Okay, I'll say it. And so our Constitution is really relegated to second-class citizenship at this point, and it's dragged out when somebody wants to make a point when they actually agree with the Constitution. But most of the time, the Constitution is being attacked by people who want the freedom to do whatever they want. The Constitution is meant to refrain people from doing whatever the hell they want. They give guidelines and guideposts. They you're not allowed to do this. So the Constitution is mostly a constraint document, is to keep you from doing things. And it articulates who should be doing what and to what degree. But the leftists, they don't want any kind of control. They don't want any, limit on what they can do. They want so the Constitution is really kind of relegated to the back seat. And today's story, which you will not hear anywhere else, maybe one or two other spots, but I promise you, I scoured, and I couldn't find anyone else doing this story other than me and Redacted. That's it. And so that's what we do here at Unspoken Truth. We bring you information and stories that you're not going to get anywhere else, but they're important for you to know.
All right, let's take a look at what you've got.
Okay, so it looks like the Senate of the United States of America just turned over a portion of our sovereignty to a foreign entity. Let's talk about it.
Denied.
Okay, so this is yet another topic that you are not going to hear talked about in the mainstream media. Now, I've been working on this report for a couple of days. As it turns out, Redacted beat me to it. Redacted did put a report out on this, but so far it's just me and Redacted. So apparently the senators of the United States of America have either never read the Constitution of the United States of America, or they just don't care about it. So this is what happened. So Congress right now is working on the NDAA. That's the National Defense Authorization Act, funding our Defense Department. Now, you're probably already aware that America is part of NATO, and in NATO, they have what they call Article 5. So you always hear about Article 5 being invoked, Article 5 being invoked. And that refers to, an attack on one nation is an attack on all nations inside of the NATO coalition, right? Well, Rand Paul offered a simple amendment to this NDAA bill. Today, I offered an amendment to the NDAA that would have clarified that Article 5 of the NATO treaty does not supersede the Constitution. That should be one big duh, right? And let's take a look at the actual amendment, because it is literally like one sentence long. It is the sense of Congress that Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty does not supersede the constitutional requirement that Congress declare war before the United States engages in war. Okay, this should not be a controversial statement. All he's doing is he's clarifying what is already in the Constitution, that the responsibility of declaring war that would take America into a shooting war is that of the Congress of the United States and Congress alone. So it is disgraceful that not one Democrat voted for that amendment. And even more disgraceful, only 16 Republicans voted for it. Now, remember, in the Senate, we have 100 people, right? And right now, it is a divided Senate, 50-50. So I want to show you a clip from Mike Lee talking about this issue, and then we'll polish it up at the end.
Okay, so something really weird and quite concerning just happened. We're debating the National Defense Authorization Act, a bill that goes through Congress every year where we talk about defense priorities. My friend and colleague, Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, introduced an amendment number 222 to this act. And it's a simple amendment. It's just one sentence. It says, it is the sense of Congress that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty does not supersede the constitutional requirement that the Congress declare war before the United States engages in war. Look, the Constitution requires this already, so it's a no-brainer. And most of my colleagues voted against it. Last I checked, there were 0 Democrats and only 16 Republicans who voted for it. So this really did surprise me, because the Constitution makes very clear in Article 1, Section 8, that in order to declare war, you've got to have a declaration of war from Congress. The president can't do that on his own. And we certainly don't want a treaty deciding that for us and taking us to war. Now, the reason he references Article 5 of the NATO Treaty is that that does contain an expectation that we'll defend the sovereignty of other nation states. But there's nothing in there that supersedes our constitutional responsibility to get Congress to authorize that. And there's not even anything in there that overtly requires us to go to war. We often assume that it may get to that. In some cases, it will. But I think it's very, very dangerous to have a situation where you could go to war solely by virtue of a treaty provision that itself doesn't require you to go to war, much less supersede our own Constitution.
Okay, so this should have been a nothing burger, right? All that amendment was saying is that we want the responsibility of sending us to war to be in the hands of Congress, not some treaty with a group of foreign countries. So by not voting for this amendment, these politicians are telling you they are perfectly comfortable with the idea of a foreign country, a foreign treaty, dragging us into a war without consulting the United States Congress. This is just one more example of how the foundational principles that this country is built on are being shoved aside. They're being ignored. They're being diminished. Anyway, I thought that at least one person ought to do a YouTube video on it, right? So far it's me and Redacted. If you don't mind, could you give this video a like and make sure you subscribed if you haven't subscribed yet. Ed Anderson, live from Minnesota, signing out.
All right, nice work, man. You really got to the heart of that straight away, which is really good. There's something in there that you probably don't realize that I'm going to pick you up on.
Okay.
Yep. So you've heard WEF, Klaus Schwab, and all of those dickheads running around in their fancy suits saying they want a one world government. Yeah. So one thing that you kind of missed in there, which points towards that. So we started out by saying that, you know, these WEF types and these globalists and that agenda is inserted in our governments via the bureaucracy, via the deep state, which is the bureaucracy. They want NATO to be the world's police force. So there's a lot of people here in Australia asking, when they had the NATO summit in Lithuania a week and a bit ago, why is our Prime Minister going there? Why is the New Zealand Prime Minister in Lithuania? He's part of the Five Eyes, sure. But New Zealand is about as far away from Europe as you could get. Tell me a country that's further away from Europe than New Zealand. There isn't one. That's them. They're the furthest country away, right? But why is he there at NATO? Well, what they were talking about was creating an Asian alliance, a North Asian Treaty Organization style NATO for Asia. And New Zealand happens to be in the Asia Pacific, or better known more politically correctly these days, because we don't want to say Asia because it denotes China, and it's like China owns the Pacific. We say Indo-Pacific. They've changed the lexicon of our language, but the reality is it's Asia Pacific, not Indo-Pacific, and it's just ridiculous. So part of the reason that what's happening there in Congress, that they're agreeing to all of these things and allowing NATO to veto your founding documents there, the rule book that governs your society, is because these WEF, one world government types, want NATO to be the world's police force. And to that guy, was he a senator or is he a congressman, or whomever that fellow was in your report, he's saying like this
Mike
should
Lee.
be a no-brainer. Like why are we doing this? Well, the reason that they're doing that is because they want NATO to be the police force, and the treaty will govern where it goes and what assets it uses and how that actually works. It's very, very. Did you know that? Did you know that they wanted NATO to be the police force?
Yes, it did. Yeah.
You did. You did. Why do you? So is that the reason that you think that they're vetoing all of this, and why they want it so badly?
Well, I don't know if I get whether I give them that much credit. I think they just have a natural aversion to anything that smacks of nationalism or self-interest. They don't like the Constitution, so for them, I don't think they even had to read very much into it. They say, "Oh, so if our Constitution says it, I'm gonna vote the opposite direction." There's a lot of people in our Congress and Senate who are itching to get us into war with Russia. They're itching to put
Strange, eh? So weird.
Yeah,
Man.
People like Graham,
Lindsey Graham,
Lindsey Graham, who's a supposed Republican, but he's all horny to get into a war against Russia. The people have the blinders on. They hate Russia so much, and if you ask them to articulate why they hate Russia so much, they couldn't tell you.
Putin's a criminal. They're a bunch of they're a bunch of crooks, is what they'll say. And it's like, well, hold on, man,
Yeah.
that's the pot calling the kettle black, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So what with it, that this could lead to a nuclear exchange? So what? So
Can I play devil's advocate here?
sure.
Tell me what you think, because you looked into this like quite a bit more than I have. Let me play devil's advocate and be somebody who votes like, if Article 5 is evoked, we're going. We don't need Congress approval. So the reason that I would vote yes for that, when I look at both sides of the conversation, and here's a bit of unspoken truth for you, right, is in the early 2000s, the United States was attacked. And the only time, my understanding is the only time Article 5 was ever evoked was the 9/11 incident. And America was attacked. An attack on one is an attack on all. What are we doing? Don't worry, we're going to go after Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. We're going to go for it. And then, I can remember seeing footage of like Danish troops in Afghanistan. You're like, what? That's because they're part of NATO, and it was the ISAF force, not the NATO force. It started off as a NATO force, and then it turned into ISAF, and that is part of the reason that where I play devil's advocate to say, well, if Poland is attacked, Poland would expect that we come to their aid under Article 5 and not be hamstrung by the bureaucracy of Congress. Because when America was attacked, we came to your aid, and we didn't use our governments to say, no, we're not supporting America. We don't support them doing that. They evoked Article 5 and off they came. So I can kind of see, if I play devil's advocate, to the side of no, and that's got to do with sentiment, right? And it's got to do with them believing that you're going to do what it is that you say you're going to do, and adhering to Article 5 without Congress, without all of that. Because previously, 20 years ago, when Article 5 was evoked, we all did it without question. So we expect you to do it without question as well in our time of need. That's why they're saying yes to that. What do you think? Is that a reasonable hypothesis?
Well, that's not a bad try. That's about.
I'm trying to justify NATO as a one-world police force.
I know you're paying devil's advocate, and I say, so you did a good job of putting together what would be, their best argument, and so that's a very good effort. However, okay,
here it comes.
Here it goes. Listen, just because we want to preserve our Constitution does not mean that we will not honor our commitment to NATO, right? We just want to know that the final, the official say so to go to an actual shooting war does rest with Congress. And, we reserve the right to be a sovereign nation. Just because we get into an agreement with other countries on whatever subject you can think of, those are like good faith intentions that people enter into for the benefit of everyone, but we do reserve the right to look out for our best interest first. What would happen if a NATO country provoked a war with another country, and we told them, hey man, look, you got what you deserve. So why should we fight for you for being stupid?
There's some unspoken truths right there, and not a lot of people recognise that there's at the summit in Vilnius last week. I don't know what happened behind closed doors. I wasn't there. But as far as I could tell from what mainstream media is reporting on that, and they are literally just reporting on what happens, they spin the story in a way that actually suits their narrative. But one of the things that they were talking about was all of these bilateral meetings that Zelensky had with these world leaders. So think of like G20 or G7 or something like that. If you were the leader of that country, do you sit down literally with every single member of the G7 or the G20? The answer is no. They definitely don't. They might, Biden might sit down with Rishi Sunak and somebody else, but they don't all sit together and hold hands and sit around and sing Kumbaya. They sit around a desk, as you see in the public forum, and then they have those discussions in public, and everybody's like jostling. It's a staged event. Yeah. But behind closed doors, if Zelensky's met with 30 other NATO nations, and they came out of that, the unspoken truth is that they came out of that saying they were bilateral agreements. And there was something that a lot of mainstream media seemed to have missed, but it was in the Ukrainian media and Ukrainian propaganda, where Poland and Lithuania were talking about getting together, forming a coalition and going to help them. Yeah. So if Polish troops are now getting clipped on the battlefield by Russian cruise missiles or something like that, does that evoke Article 5? Or what's the point of NATO even being there if Poland are going to go and do their own thing, get into a fight with Russia, be attacked, and, what? It just doesn't seem to make any sense. But on top of all of that, Donald Trump did something really good when he came. And I remember one of the things that he ran on was to say, this NATO thing is just a load of shit. We're carrying everybody. And he's completely objective about it. Like, yeah, we need security. Yeah, we need the military. Yeah, we need all of that stuff. But just look at the numbers. Countries are supposed to put 2% of their GDP into this, and we're putting their amount of GDP into the treaty to support them. So that means that if they ever get attacked or something happens and they evoke Article 5, we have to come and rescue them. But they're not doing anything to rescue themselves in anticipation of something going wrong. The whole point is that we all support each other and we all contribute an equal amount. And that equal amount is 2% of your GDP to NATO, but they're not doing it. And Donald Trump was talking about dissolving it, remember? What do we need it for? The Russians are not our enemy. And at that time, they weren't really our enemy either. Putin's trying to engage with the world. He's trying to do all these things since he came to power in the early 2000s. And he kind of threw his hands up around 2010. Nobody is doing what they say they're going to do. This is a waste of time. I'm going to turn everything inwards. So the history of it is quite complicated, but it really comes down to this one thing, doesn't it? If Article 5 is evoked, then blindly off we go into a conflict. You guys there in America and us in Australia by association as well.
Well, that's the way NATO wants to have it, right? But what Ron Paul is saying, no, listen, we have a constitution. Our constitution does not, it gives Congress the primary responsibility for declaring when to go to war. That's it. That doesn't mean that does not mean we're not going to go to war to help NATO out. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean we're not going to honor, but we reserve the right.
You got to follow the process.
Right. We reserve the right to have a say. Congress has to be the one to authorize it, not some random clause with a group of random people in a treaty far, far away. That's not enough to send American soldiers into harm's way. That control has to rest with Congress, and our own politicians, who are senators and congressmen, don't care about that one simple provision, which you would think would be a nothing burger. You would think, well, of course it would pass. Who could argue with that statement?
Well, I think it. Let me be devil's advocate again here for you, then say why I would allow that to happen. Why would I would allow Article 5 to supersede the Constitution, and debunk me here, right?
Okay, good luck.
All of it's a moot point. It doesn't matter because you're already at war with Russia, and Ukraine not being in NATO is a moot point as well, because if we stop supplying them weapons, they're going to get rolled up. They're already in NATO. So what's the problem? Like we're already supplying them weapons. We're already we're already doing everything that we would probably do. And think of Rand Paul. If suddenly Article 5 was evoked, people in the floor of the place where all the decisions get made may come out and say, well, we don't want to get directly involved in this conflict, so let's just supply them with all the weapons. And that's what Donald Trump said was either sit down and negotiate or we'll cut you off. You sit down and negotiate. The Russians say, no, I'm going to give you more weapons than you've ever seen before. And that's how I'm going to end this war. So Donald Trump has said that, but he hasn't said, he stopped short of saying that the way that I would end it is to send American forces there. He's like, no, I'm going to send the Ukrainians more weapons than they've ever seen before and give them all the support that they actually need. So isn't that the same thing?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump would not have the authority to send troops into. That's a war. Okay, so he would have to go to Congress and convince them to sign off on it. Right?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. He's saying that he wouldn't go to war with Russia. What he's saying is you sit down at that table and talk. Yeah. If Putin goes, piss off, I'm not talking to anybody like that, and Zelensky going, well, I tried, I'm doing what you told me to do, then Trump saying he'll give more weapons than they've ever seen before to actually end it and arm them to the eye teeth to actually shut it down and to stop it. But all he's going to do is prolong it and provoke it even more.
Well, to your point, we are, make no mistakes, America is at war with Russia right now.
Exactly.
This is not we said that, I don't know how many times on this show.
Congress or not.
This is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. This is a war between America and Russia, and this is just a proxy war. All right. But there are some niceties involved with when in the course of wars, because there is something to be said for not being in a war officially, because you can stand back and let someone else take the bloody nose for you, right?
Yes, that's exactly the point, right? That's exactly how they're playing out with these things. Let's round out today's show with highlighting exactly how they pick and choose and cherry pick when it suits them, because you would have seen, again, some of this content's a little bit spicy for YouTube. That's why I'm not putting it there. But the hearing that Robert F. Kennedy went to yesterday, where it was about censorship, and Debbie Schultz put forward a motion to censor Robert F. Kennedy during a censorship hearing. So she wanted to take it behind closed doors so it's not in the public space. So that's like the ultimate, my head's going to explode. Aren't you all about free speech and people being able to say whatever they want, whenever they want? He was not inciting violence. He claimed he never said those things anyway. But you're trying to censor the guy so he can't have his say. But that goes against the idea of free speech. Everybody should be able to say what it is that they want. And if you disagree with what the guy has to say, you should be able to speak up in public and say it. Then he should be able to say it in public as well. But what she was trying to do is trying to use the law and the system that they are inside of there, the guardrails that they have, to say, no, he can't say those things. And we're not going to listen to a person who made these claims or made these allegations. We're just not going to listen to that person. And what we're going to do is we're going to put them aside and we're going to silence them and we're not going to give them a voice. Isn't that the ultimate irony, where they're in a hearing about free speech and somebody that's behind the desk that's in charge is saying that we're going to censor somebody in a hearing about free speech? And it goes to the heart of, they pick and choose the bits and pieces of the documents that they have in front of them to suit their cause and suit their narrative at the time that they're using it.
Well, I wouldn't call it irony. I'd call it hypocrisy. And this is a textbook example of it. For those of you who don't know, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is like the lowest piece of scum on the face of the earth.
Really?
Oh yeah, she has a history of this kind of garbage, and the only reason why she can be such a gutter dwelling person in the Senate is because she comes from a district that she's safe in. She'll always get reelected because she's part of the machine locally. And the disgraceful part was, so you're right. So this was a meeting, a committee meeting on censorship. And how did they start out with? They start out with
trying to censor someone.
Yeah, trying to censor someone.
How are you going to get to the bottom of what the guy needs to testify about if you're going to censor him? Doesn't make any sense.
So she starts out by saying, I don't think this gentleman should be allowed to testify because of the comments he's made in the past about Jews. I'm just making stuff out of thin air, just making stuff up. But they don't expect people to do any kind of research. She just makes it up. And she said, so I think we should move this to a closed hearing, so he can talk, but not in public. It just, off the record, off the camera. So she puts that. So I propose that we, and then someone right away said, well, I motion that we table your motion, which means set it aside. So they do a vote. The scary thing is the vote only passed by
it just passed, yeah,
by two votes. So
yeah.
So she almost pulled it off. These are the kind of tricks that leftists do. They look for every little way they can do to shut people up. And they are, I mean, if you want, and I did a video on this on my channel where I took some important snippets of that whole hearing out of it. And it's such a shameful, disgraceful display of arrogance and fascism that I never thought I would see in an American Senate.
There was a did you see the Patrick Bet-David podcast with yesterday? There was like a really super heated argument with Pat and his guest, and they were talking about Hillary Clinton, and Pat was just going off with this guy, and it was something that was unbelievably divisive, what they were actually doing and what they were talking about. So
Anthony Weiner?
Anthony Weiner, yeah, that's the guy. I was just Googling his name quickly to remember that. So it's as if Patrick asks a question and Anthony gives the answer, and he sits there so smugly saying whatever he wants to say when he's defending an indefensible position. And it's really no different to what that woman did yesterday in that committee hearing. Is she's trying to defend a position that's indefensible. You can't have a hearing about censorship and censor the people that are there to talk to you about censorship under their own free will. Like, why even have the hearing in the first place? It seems ridiculous that you would do that. And the optics of it look so ridiculous, but people just don't follow politics closely enough to see how badly it's actually handled. Yep. And part of the reason that I like doing this show with you, Ed, is because I think it needs to be brought more forward in the public discourse, these conversations, and people need to start caring about how politics actually works and how these things actually happen. Because if that was the only thing that you saw all year and you were an advocate for free speech, you would look at that and think, who is that person? What side of politics is she on? Well, whatever I do, if that's what that side of politics believes, I'm never going to vote for that. I'm never going to be part of that, because change is really hard, but change is not going to happen from those people because those people are already there. The only change that's ever going to be made is by the people actually voting, saying, no, we don't want that. And that we see that here in Australia with the divisive politics that we have here in Australia. I never thought Australians could be so divided. It's very strange that the Australian public is so unbelievably divided. But if you talk to Australian people, they hate politics. They hate politicians. They despise them. They're despicable gutter dwellers. They despise politicians. That's at least been my lifetime anecdote. Not just, oh yeah, that guy's a really good dude. He's the right person to be in charge. People just hate politicians. But they don't pay any attention to the way that the system runs, and then they complain about things that actually happen. So they think that they can't control it, but they can control it, because you can control it when you go to the ballot box and you vote. You absolutely can do that. And the change comes from not within the system that's already there, that's actually embedded there. It comes from the people from without it. Well, at least that's the theory. I don't know how Joe Biden got 81 million more votes than Barack Obama, but that's the theory. He must have done something right from his basement, man, to really bring people together.
Yeah, that's a whole. We were save that for another topic for another.
That's
day.
me just shit stirring you at the end of the show here. Is it working?
Yeah. But let's suffice it to say that the politics, in my humble opinion, which I'm right, so just it's true.
It matters. You have to listen.
That's right. It's all about marketing. Politics is marketing, and whoever has the best, spin. Whoever has the best marketing is going to win. Now, it just so happens that socialists and Marxists and communists, they happen to have a pretty enticing message. Everything, vote for me and everything will be free. A lot of people like free stuff. everything for free, everything for free. Forget all you have to do is give away some of your freedoms. The sign here, the conservative message is a little bit harder. There, it's about taking responsibility. It's about controlling your own destiny. But it means you're responsible for getting up in the morning and making something out of your life. Versus the socialist message is, you get up whenever you want. Don't worry about putting a suit on. You can put on a sweatsuit and watch reruns. We'll still take care of you. So it's all so it's about messaging. And I'll say one last point on this topic is always keep in mind, that at least in America, and I think in Australia too, we're in a very divided society. Pretty much right down the road, right? So in every election cycle, it really comes down to convincing just a small sliver of people that's going to make all the difference. And so when you're hearing politicians giving their stump speeches, you have to understand that they have their messaging is a certain segment of society for their messages. Those are targeted messages. And now that's one of the reasons why I think RFK is breaking through, actually, because he's actually doing the opposite. He is actually, his message is one of inclusivity, right? Which makes him unique. And so when you're unique, when you have a unique message, that's when you stand out from the crowd. Everyone else in his cohort, all the other Democrats, they're divisive figures. He talks a lot. He was very eloquent. If you watch the last 5 minutes of his testimony yesterday, and if you go to the Hayed YouTube channel and watch the video.
Did you post it up there?
Yeah, I posted it on there. And I put some clips on there. So if you watch the last 5 minutes of that clip, it's like a 17-minute video. He was very eloquent, where he talked about how freedom of speech really is one of the key things that separates America from every other country or every other form of government that came before us. It was the key, it was a defining feature, what made America great. And what you're doing right now is you're dividing the country. This is his message to all the censorship stuff. You're dividing America. This is the message of hate. And we should be focusing on a message of love and inclusivity. And the only way you do that is by allowing people to enjoy free speech. Free speech wasn't invented for the easy speech. It was invented for the hard speech, the speech that you despise. And
did you see? It sounds like you watched the whole thing there. Did you see that there's some old guy sitting up on the lectern or wherever he's sitting, and he's got glasses and a moustache. I don't know who he is, and he's like, "You're a disgrace. That I revere the Kennedy family name, and I got into this because of your father, and you're a disgrace, you're this, you're that," and he's like kind of name calling him and saying and calling it out, and it's like it's the RFK must be sitting there going, "Dude, that's just hypocrisy. If you stood for everything that my father and my uncle stood for, you wouldn't be here trying to censor me and vote for some stupid tabling of a vote to shut me down. Why can't you see what you're actually doing? Can't you see that you're the one that's drifted away from the central values that we all once stood for in this Democratic Party, and now you've moved completely away from it?" It's like, it's pretty ridiculous. It's the ultimate irony.
Yeah. RFK Jr., he's a true guardian of the legacy of his father. It's like he was put in a time capsule, and his principles, the principles of his father, were preserved during all this time. And now he's speaking out. Somebody broke the glass. Now he's expressing exactly the principles that the Democratic Party stood for back then. And this just shows how far away the Democratic Party has moved from their core principles. Now they are fascist, okay, and I can prove it. I mean, one of the definitions, one of the hallmarks of fascism is shouting down your enemies so that they can't talk. Okay? They don't want you to talk, and if you do, and we see it all the time when conservative speakers go to college campuses. And they stand up, they shout, they shout them down literally so they can't be heard. This is what fascists do. They don't have an argument. They can't win on their arguments. So the only thing they can do is to keep you from making your argument. That's why you will never see any of these other Democrats debate RFK on the stage, because they know he will blow them away, because they cannot defend their position.
Let me close out today's show, Ed, and it's been a really important one, I think. I'm gonna read you quickly a list of 10 things and tell me who this politician is. 1, God is real. 2, there are 2 genders. 3, human flourishing requires fossil fuels. 3, reverse racism is racism. Well, that's 4, sorry. 5, an open border is no border. 6, parents determine the education of their children. 7, the nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. 8, capitalism lifts people up from poverty. 9, there are 3 branches of the US government, not 4. 10, the US Constitution is the strongest guarantor of freedoms in history. Do you know who said that?
RFK.
No, Vivek Ramsway.
Who?
Vivek Ramsway.
Vivek Ramsway? Who the hell?
Vivek Ramsari. How do you say his surname?
Oh, that guy, the Republican.
Yep.
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm butchering his surname.
Yeah.
Sorry, dude. I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, but yeah, I've been listening to his messages because he's on my Twitter and stuff, and just hearing what he's saying. And I don't know if you saw the interview with him and Tucker Carlson. He's kind of saying we've got to dispense with the Republican and Democrat names, and what we've got to do is say we're all Americans. And I really like that idea. I thought the idea of that was good in theory.
Every 4 years in the early days of the election, that's what they all say.
That's how it plays?
That's right. And
that's not cynical of you. You're not being cynical, are you, by any chance?
I'm just a guy who's been through a few election cycles. That's all. Just being just reporting the news.
You're just saying the unspoken truth is what it is.
That's right. Just reporting the news.
All right.
It's par for the course, and that's they've got to have their bumper stickers all ready to go for the state fairs, and go to the state fairs and eating the hot dog. They've got to have little bumper stickers they can throw out. Manna for the crowd, little pearls of wisdom for the crowd.
I got drawn all the way into his message. See, his marketing actually worked on me, even though I'm not an American. It's just the concept of what he's saying is actually right. And I think what he did when he was talking to Tucker is he kind of qualified that a little bit better than most people would. It's a typical politician thing to say is like, we need to come together and we're all Australians, or we're all Americans. Let's go and let's have a better future for ourselves. And that's where people make the mistake of thinking that one politician is going to save them from themselves. But in a capitalist society, the only person that's going to save you is you.
Yeah, I mean, politicians can say, "I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that." When, hey, man, it doesn't matter, man. You have no control of the budget. That's Congress. These what these politicians should be doing, in my opinion, is when they're campaigning, they should be saying, "All right, so that's my message, and it's important that we take back the White House for our party. But don't forget, I also need help. I need you to bring along." They should go to every campaign with the local congressman and the local senator in that district, and they should be campaigning with them and make it like a package deal. And I think
this is what you're going to get when I'm in charge.
Yeah.
This is how I'm going to help you guys as the constituents. They're in charge as well. Yeah, we see a lot of corruption here in Australia about that, where government makes. So the government of the day, when we come up to the elections, there was, I want to say there was a swimming pool incident where the government promised to build a whole lot of public pools, these big infrastructure projects, right? They're not small projects, they're big, they're worth millions of dollars, and building it in all electorates that are under the Labor banner or under the Liberal banner, or I'm going to give X amount of dollars to the football clubs in Labor electorates, and they're like using that as to entice you to do that. I remember here in Australia, I'll round out with this, here in Australia we had a government in charge that was trying to roll out this thing called the NBN, the National Broadband Network. And before all this green energy garbage that we've got going on in nuclear submarines, NBN is the biggest infrastructure project in Australia. And what it essentially did was bring fibre optic cable to every home in Australia. And if you don't have fibre like that, there was some version of high-speed internet that would connect everybody, right? So it's probably a better way of saying it is NBN was designed to put high-speed internet in everybody's hands. And the idea behind it is really good, but there's a lot of opposition. And I remember Scott Morrison at the time was like complaining about it, and he was in the opposition. Yeah, they weren't in government. And Scott Morrison was my local member here, federal member for Cook, and he's carrying on about it. And I remember watching Parliament Question Time saying, "Oh, well, the constituents of Cook will be last on the list." And I was like sitting there going, Scott Morrison's carrying on about it, and now you're telling me that I'm going to be last on the list in Australia to get high-speed internet because some politician is got an axe to grind with ScoMo because he wasn't supporting it. And that's actually what happened. We were one of the last areas in all of Australia to get NBN because of that. And it's just so, if you think there's no corruption going on, you're wrong. There's corruption going on. And I started out by saying that ASIC were attempting to interfere with the Australian political system, and they're not supposed to do that. We've got bureaucrats interfering with it, and they're on the public record through freedom of information, interfering and trying to actually change the way that things are going to happen, trying to change the way investigations are happening. So it's no surprise that it's so divided and so many people hate politicians and hate politics in general. It's no surprise at all.
Well, I feel bad for you, Robbie, because I mean, at least we don't have any corruption here in America. So
you're lucky, man. You are squeaky clean.
I can't relate to that story.
All right, that's a good place to round it out. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget, we're available as a podcast over on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Come on over to Twitter and Telegram. All of the links are right down in the description. Let's get out of here, Ed. We'll see you next week. Bye for now, mate.
Bye.